Hello, this is Naomi Mijan, Senior Editor of Building Operating Management Magazine. Thank you for attending today's webcast, Purpose-Driven Maintenance, Getting More Done for Less. Our presenter is Andrew Tansky, Regional Service Manager for Schneider Electric. Andrew has been a business development and sales strategist for over 15 years. Since joining Schneider Electric in 2009, Andrew has held various account and sales management positions for the eco-building business of Schneider Electric. In his current role as a Regional Services Manager for the East, Andrew is now leading business development strategy for the EcoStruxure Building Advisor service portfolio, including standardization of sales and delivery processes for IoT building management platforms, and advancing maintenance practices with remote digital services and analytics fault detection and diagnostics technology. Today's learning objectives include review 3 keys to effectively use existing lean maintenance resources, analyze how to optimize building management decisions, including prioritizing work, expense spending, and analytics, identify how to increase the technical competency of staff, and assess the benefits of implementing predictive maintenance. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few details about today's event. A live question and answer session will follow today's presentation. To submit questions, please use the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen and send your questions to all panelists. Our presenter will answer as many questions as time permits. At the conclusion of today's webcast, you will receive a PDF copy of today's presentation slides. You will also receive a link to a brief online assessment. Upon successful completion of this assessment, you will receive your CEU certificate. Today's webcast will also be archived at facilitiesnet.com/webcasts. And now, a brief word from our sponsor.
Schneider Electric is leading the digital transformation of energy management and automation in homes, buildings, data centers, infrastructure, and industry. With global presence in over 100 countries, Schneider is the undisputable leader in power management, medium voltage, low voltage, and secure power, and in automation systems. We provide integrated efficiency solutions, combining energy, automation, and software. At Schneider Electric, life is on everywhere, for everyone, and at every moment.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you very much, Naomi, and good afternoon and good morning to everybody who's had the availability to join our webinar today. As Naomi said, my name is Andrew Tansky. I am a Regional Service Manager for Schneider Electric, and what we're going to talk about in the next 45 minutes or so is going to be around purpose-driven maintenance. And how are we capable of utilizing newer technologies and newer ways to think about services and maintenance to enact a different kind of an environment and different kind of experience within the facilities we manage, we service, and we maintain on a daily basis. So if we look at the agenda, the first thing we're going to kind of walk through is we're going to talk about some macro trends within the industry as a whole. We're going to utilize some of the survey information that has been collected. Then we're going to transition to technology aids of proactive maintenance approach and being more proactive and condition-based and allowing technology to kind of differentiate the way we experience our building technologies and how we utilize that data to service and maintain the facilities we manage in a kind of a different mindset. And then from a visibility standpoint, how we utilize this for better decision makings. And then around efficiencies, around analytics and guidance and increasing team competency. And then provide some real-world examples, and then we'll close the webinar with some, as Naomi said, some live Q&A. So first thing we're going to talk about is some facility management trends. And the next slide that's coming up, it was part of the Building Operating Management's annual FM Pulse survey. The data we're going to look at is from 17 and 18, but it is very consistent and coherent for 19 as well. But if we look at, and I'm just going to fill this in this entire slide, but if we look at some of the trends within the industries, and we break it out according to kind of 4 key markets or key verticals. from an office, higher education, hospitality, and medical. And we start to understand where is money and how is staffing being spent within these organizations. So, and we start to look at, from a staffing perspective, it's been held flat year after year. Operational side of it, it's grown in some of the verticals from an office space and slightly within hospitality and medical. And then if you look at the CapEx side of it, it's kind of increasing in most of the segments and most of the verticals when looking at the data. And why is this important, and why even bring this up, and why perform surveys like this? Because it starts to paint a very interesting story on how buildings and facilities are managed and maintained, and how we start to view staffing complexities versus how much money do we have within an operational budget and how much is being spent on CapEx. And it starts to paint an interesting story around the facilities we need to maintain and how the systems that are being installed can provide additional insights, and how do we start to mine those systems and those IoT systems so we can start leveraging that technology and that data that's generated to provide the staffing, which is not increasing, a little bit more insights. And some of the next slides when we talk about macro trends are going to build on this common theme, and it's something as we walk through this particular presentation, I just ask to keep these metrics in the back of your mind, because it starts to paint a story, and it starts to tell a story of how the industry, what's occurring in the industry, and how can we respond to better service the industry and better service the facilities we are asked to maintain on a daily basis. So we start to look at some of labor challenges in macro trends. So the first one we look at is 40% of the workforce will retire within the next 10 years. This particular piece of information came from a TSIA service study, and it's based around service individuals who service the industries that we all work in. And it was a 2014 study. So if we think about 40% of the workforce will retire in the next 10 years based upon a 2014 study, we're starting to be right in the middle of that kind of change and migration within the industry from a labor expertise. And what we're seeing from that particular study, and I'm personally seeing within the industry and from the vast amount of end users and service providers I happen to interact with, is we're starting to see individuals with 35 years of experience at one particular facility or one site or within the industry either getting set to retire or moving to different positions within the organizations and taking on different responsibilities. And we're transitioning that labor pool to individuals who are greener within the industries and verticals and markets we work in, and within the facilities that they're managing and maintaining. And it's an interesting thing that's happening, because if you think about a 35-year veteran or individuals with 20-plus years of experience, they understand how the facility operates. They understand what is an expectation from either tenants or from the patients within a healthcare facility or students within the higher education, or if you think about the hotel segment from an occupancy standpoint. They understand what the expectation is. They understand how the system operates. They understand how the system goes together. And as we start to migrate away from that experience tree and start to hire greener individuals, it's how do we start to what can we start to do to allow these individuals to work smarter, to have a baseline of information like a 20-plus or 35-year veteran, and start operating their facilities, and the key point, making business decisions based upon a breadth of knowledge and a breadth of information. And that's something that we're going to talk about, of how to start to bridge that gap. The second one is 3 times the amount of work. And this is something that's interesting, is when we go back to the capital spending and the operational spending, right? So as we start to increase capital spending, the easiest and most, the cleanest way to think about it, as we start to spend more on the CapEx side of it, we start to increase the amount of square footage. And when we start to increase the amount of square footage, it's the amount of square footage that the current staff has to maintain. And if you think back to that survey result, where staffing is staying flat, but we're adding capital money into our organizations, the capital money is normally spent on increasing square footage or new office spaces that predominantly introduce newer systems and newer technologies. So it's not just a square footage, it's also newer technologies that are being introduced that the current level of staffing is being asked to manage and maintain. So how do we start to handle all that? We have, and this is where the story kind of gets painted a little bit more clear, is we have a staffing survey and the staffing requirements that are being held flat year after year. Operational expenditures being held somewhat flat year after year. We're increasing the amount of possibly square footage or the amount of systems and IoT systems that are interconnected and driving additional systems within facilities to provide a different experience for the occupancy or the occupants of that building. And we're doing that with individuals who are newer within the industry. So it's kind of an interesting time to be in the industry, and around the maintenance side of it is how do we handle all of this? And it's also at a time when individuals from a technical or engineering skill set is growing at twice the rate as other job professions within the industry. So it's an interesting time, especially around the labor challenges. And just to reiterate, it's around we're increasing the number of systems, the complexity of the systems, the amount of square footage in office space or hotel space or healthcare space, and we're increasing that and putting that onus and that responsibility on individuals who have limited, I don't want to say limited, but not as much experience as the individuals who they have been taking over for. So what does that lead us to? And it leads us to an also interesting demographical change as well. So we already went over the 40% and around the technical side of it, but this is an interesting one too, is around today's workforce and the generational workforce. In that today, 1 in 5 of the current generational workforce is under 30 years of age. And by 2020, just next year, the youngest generations will comprise 50% of the workforce. And as we see here from this data, it was taken from an Aberdeen Group data survey and analysis. But why is this important? And it's important from a technology standpoint. And it's important from understanding that the youngest generations of individuals expect a different experience when they enter the workforce. And they expect buildings and facilities to operate differently. They expect a different interaction with technology. These individuals grew up only understanding what an iPhone or an iPad or a tablet was. And I heard a great phrase about the youngest generation. They expect 3 things. They expect the interesting thing is they understand that they always have to pay taxes. They always have to operate in a work environment, and they always expect Wi-Fi. And it can be termed a joke, but it's actually a realistic expectation, is that the younger generation expects to interact with technology in a different mindset. They expect technology to be there. And this is something when we're hiring individuals to manage and maintain our facilities, they expect to work in a highly technological environment. When we go to try to transition space from a tenant perspective and providing tenants with the latest and greatest technology, those tenants or the employees of those tenants, they expect to work and be employed in a technologically advanced environment. Patient care, from a healthcare perspective, they expect to be in an advanced technological environment. So the technology demand is ever increasing as we go year by year, and the youngest generations in the workforce are encouraging that and demanding that we make those changes. So now we look at, and this is kind of a foreshadowing slide. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because what we're going to spend some time in today talking about is analytics and how we utilize analytics and data for making business decisions. And what this slide shows is around a 1-9-90 principle, and it really starts to break down where this happens to be for a commercial office space, but where does money normally get spent from an operational expenditure budget side? And we look at, from a utility standpoint, on average represents about 1% of the portfolio, real estate 9%, and then the people aspect is 90%. And the people aspect can be from a salary standpoint to benefits, HR, compliance, things like that. But a component of that is productivity of the people as well. So as we walk through the analytical side of it, and the reason why I wanted to show this in the very beginning, before we get into analytics and analytically driven service and why analytics are important in the current environment, is traditionally the analytics within the markets and the industries we serve have really only highlighted the utility aspect of it. They really went for where can we conserve energy, what energy efficiency projects can we work on, how do we constantly commission, retro commission our systems, which really provides benefits around the utility side, and the ROI is driven around the utility side. And what this slide starts to show is we need to be thinking about the data that our systems generate and the decisions we're making on how we manage and maintain our facilities more around the people aspect of it, because they represent a bigger share of where time and productivity and dollars are being invested and spent on a daily basis. So the more that we can start thinking about how do we utilize technology in our maintenance approaches to deliver a different experience, to deliver a more comfortable environment, because more comfortable environments lead to more productive environments, we have a bigger rock to be pushed around the people aspect of it. So it's something, as we kind of walk through this and think about analytics, traditionally they've always been around the utility side of it, and we need to start thinking around how can we utilize this data that's being generated by our systems on a daily basis to start having us make informed decisions around people and comfort and productivity, because that's where more of the ROI can start to really be unveiled, not necessarily just from the utility side of it. So we're talking about striking a balance, and especially around facility managers striking a balance. And this is something that a lot of individuals on this call and a lot of individuals see within their environments today. We have aging infrastructure. We have the occupant satisfaction and financial performances. But it's also, we need to start thinking about from an energy perspective that 20% of the energy used in an average commercial building is wasted associated with poorly commissioned systems. So even though we just spoke about it's not all about utilities, what can we utilize, or what's there to try to minimize utility waste? And how do we start looking at technology to constantly commission our systems, to perform monitoring-based commissioning, to allow the data that's being generated by how our buildings breathe and how they actually are operating, allowing that data to dictate more of our business results or our business intelligence to deliver a different kind of maintenance approach. And then the second number here, about 82% of failures are random and cannot be avoided by preventative maintenance alone. And I'm going to get into a few slides from now, talking about changing the mindset of maintenance. And we think about maintenance and changing it from reactive to proactive around preventative, and now transitioning to more of condition-based. And I'll get into what condition-based and what we're talking around here. But a lot of this is we need to start striking a balance. And this kind of slide is kind of the end slide of the trends within the industry. And if we start to think about all of the trends and how this all needs to work together from a staffing perspective and operational budgets and the demographic changes that are happening and the increasing amount of square footage in IoT systems, there's a lot going on in the building as we manage and maintain on a daily basis. What can we do? How do we respond? What technologies are out there? And then that sets up the remainder of this presentation, is really start to changing the way we utilize technology on how we manage and maintain our facilities. So what we're going to get into now is how can we start to optimize our decisions, and it's really around how can we start utilizing analytical technology and expert recommendations to really start to enable condition-based maintenance approaches. And this is the heart of this, is how do we utilize the data that's already resonant to our systems, already resonant to our building automation and different IoT systems within our facilities? How do we utilize that data to provide actionable intelligence? How do we analyze that data to operate and experience the way we manage and service our facilities in a different mindset? It's a new way of thinking, and it really challenges and sets a technology kind of path forward that really starts to highlight how we can leverage technology differently in an industry that is very, very rigid on how we have gone to market and how we normally deliver services and maintenance within facilities. So the first thing we want to talk about is traditional approaches to maintenance are not enough. And we start on the left-hand part here, and we start to think about reactive, proactive, and condition-based maintenance. And the way I view this and the way that this slide kind of talks to me is that we look at an ROI, and an ROI it's a loose ROI, but it's really around, I look at it from time investment. And where can we start to save time? And we think about reactive in the traditional sense. Reactive is we will run something until it breaks, and then we will go fix it. From a proactive standpoint, this is your more traditional planned maintenance, preventative maintenance schedules, to where we're going to set schedules and we're going to manage and maintain pieces of equipment or pieces of software, things like that. We're going to have a set schedule. It could be quarterly, annually, whatever it looks like, and we're going to proactively maintain it in order to kind of cut down on the number of times that it might be a break fix. And then what we're going to kind of introduce here and talk about is migrating to more of a condition-based environment. And when we consider condition-based environment, this is really allowing the data generated by our systems to tell us and inform us, what do we need to do today? Where do I need to schedule my manpower, or what does my manpower schedule look like today to have the most impact on the building itself? And tying those impacts back to the people aspect of it, the utility aspect of it, and then the overall maintenance of the facility aspect of it. So having the ability to allow the systems within our facility to generate all this data and analyze it and provide insights and business intelligence to make smarter, more informed manpower decisions on a daily, weekly, monthly, annually sized basis. I will also talk here, when we think about reactive, and I wouldn't even call that reactive, and that 1X, I would actually deem it a negative ROI standpoint. Because normally when breaks happen and break fix, we run something to failure, it's traditionally on a weekend in a critical space to where we need to hire additional manpower on an overtime basis. We need to have parts overnighted. It becomes more onerous to the individuals who service and maintain it, to the companies who provide this facility management, and things like that. So it's really, how do we start, or what do we start doing to extract and change the mindset to more condition-based, and really allowing the building to dictate, what do we do today? How do we service it differently? Where do I need to go? How do I plan my day? And then it kind of transitions to, well, why are we doing this? Well, we already have a service planner. We already have a maintenance staff. We already have all this staff. Why do we need to analyze this data on what I need to do today? I've hired the best individuals. Well, even the best individuals we've hired in our organizations, they don't have the time to identify and prioritize all the building problems that could occur on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. There just isn't enough time in the day. And we start talking, and I relate it back to the first couple of slides, to where there's increasing square footage and system complexity. There's staffing that is being held the same. There's a demographic change that is happening from individuals with experience to a more greener kind of maintenance staff or technician staff. So we don't have the availability of these best service technicians or best service and maintenance team to identify and prioritize all the building problems that we might incur during the day. And then lastly, around rigidly planned schedules. And this kind of ties off to the proactive preventative maintenance approach, to where we are being a little bit more proactive, to where we're scheduling the ability to go look at pieces of equipment or different aspects within our systems on a regularly planned schedule, but they don't detect issues as they occur. And the interesting thing is that it's like Murphy's Law, is that we might go out and we might look at a piece of mechanical equipment on a Tuesday, and all of a sudden it's been working fine, and then on Wednesday it completely breaks down. So, or there might be an issue that arises from it. So while while being proactive and having a maintenance approach does help, and it extends the life cycle of the equipment. It extends the availability to provide a more comfortable environment and to ensure our systems are operating as they're designed and intended. But really, they don't detect issues as they occur. And that's where we want to get to. That's where condition-based thrives, is as they occur, we're going to provide insights and provide it back to the individuals to make smarter business decisions. So what does this all mean? And this really means, how do we start thinking smarter about building services? And when I say smarter, it's really around how do we start leveraging technology that is already available to change the way we think about delivering our building services. And it's really about how do we change the way we operate and service and maintain. And there's three main things here that really have come kind of in line of how we start to leverage it. From an analytical standpoint, analytics provides a tremendous amount of value. Having the availability to mine through all this building data that's being generated on a daily, minute-by-minute basis, being able to look for anomalies with that and provide insight back to particular service providers or end users and maintenance teams, having that data is what sets forth the availability to start being more condition-based, to start acting on business intelligence rather than originally planned, it's a Tuesday, we're supposed to change a fan. And changing the mindset of, it's a Tuesday, I can see through my analytical problems or my analytical solution that I have problems on this particular piece of equipment. I see the impact it has on to the occupancy comfort and the utility side of it. That's where I'm going to prioritize my manpower today, because that's where I have an impact on my building today. That's where I can have an impact on the people who occupy my building today. And that's why the remainder of this is going to be around analytics. Then we talk around cloud computing, and this is where it really starts to harness the availability and the processing power of the cloud, allows these analytical engines to really start to become very robust and start to analyze large amounts of data and start to provide that business intelligence in a different experience and a different kind of methodology. And then lastly, from a mobility standpoint, I already spoke around the demographical change of smartphones, tablets. Nobody wants to be anchored to a workstation anymore. We all need to be mobile within the field. We need to be mobile and have information at our fingertips. We need to be able to provide mobility to our maintenance teams of when they need to go service or fix or bring things back to operational efficiencies. If they need data, they want it from an iPad, from a smartphone, from a Galaxy tab. They don't want to have that kind of resonant need to be in front of a workstation. So it's really what we're talking about here is how do we start to deliver different building services, and it's around leveraging the technology that is readily available within the marketplace and to provide a different experience on how they work together. So what does it look like when adopting analytics for building maintenance? So, and I'm going to speak there's two ways to look at this. There's cloud-based solutions, and then there's premise-based solutions. And I'm going to talk more on the side of cloud-based analytical solutions. And the reason why is it's kind of seen within the industry that leveraging the capabilities of cloud computing can provide more robust analytical engines, more robust analytical analysis, so it provides a better experience and better data analysis back to end users to make more informed, smarter business decisions on how to operate and manage their facilities. So we start looking here, so what goes into analytics? How do we get these analytics and adopting it? So we look at first the system integration level, and this is what happens at my site. And the first thing we look at is what we want from any analytical platform is that it is 100% agnostic. It does not need to be dedicated to a particular brand of building automation systems, of power systems, lighting systems. The first thing we look for is we want it vendor agnostic, so it can support multiple types of systems and speak multiple different protocols and languages like BACnet, LAN, OBIX, OPC, you name it, it can support it. And this is the reason why this is important is how do we leverage the IoT of our systems that are being installed, and they need to speak these multiple protocols to leverage all the IoT going in. Then from a push level, we're going to push trend data to the cloud. And the good thing about pushing is that from a cybersecurity standpoint, it's normally a one-way outbound communication. So it's a more secure solution. It's encrypted, and then and all the analysis is done within the cloud. So now we're looking at analytics. So what's the benefit of a cloud-based system? We're looking at storage capabilities. Normally a cloud-based solution, data is always resident within the cloud forever. There isn't a storage requirement. We're no longer required to, how do we specify servers? How much data do we need? How big are these data packets? Leveraging a cloud-based solution will store it forever. And then we look at frequency of analysis. Having the availability of all this processing power within the cloud allows you to increase your frequency of analysis, and the more frequent we can analyze something, the more frequently and better analysis we can present back to the end users and maintenance teams and service providers to make more informed decisions on how they need to operate and manage their facilities. And then something I'll talk about in another slide from now is what types of solutions are out there. And we're going to look at managed services versus rules-based, because there are kind of different nuances between the two. And then from an end-user standpoint or maintenance provider or service provider, well, what do we see? So what am I getting out of all of this? And normally it's delivered back on a web level, so availability on a smartphone, an iPad, a computer, regular desktop. But what are we going to see? We're going to see faults. What are we going to see in those faults? Maybe stuck dampers, leaking valves, sensor malfunctions, sequences of improvement. Where can I start economizers or staging my cooling towers or loop set points? And then from a capital measures, do I have the availability to justify VFD or energy avoidance or different kind of projects that I can invest capital dollars in order to improve my system and optimize my system? And these are all important things, because if we start to think about faults and just stuck dampers or leaking valves or sensor malfunctions or short cycling, can these be identified by individuals? I would say most likely they could, but it would require individuals sitting in front of the systems, looking at every single piece of equipment, every point value, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, and making the analysis. And if you get into larger facilities with, we'll say, 100 pieces of mechanical equipment or 200 building automation controllers, we can't process all of that data with an individual sitting in front of a workstation. Though these are vital pieces of fault information, and they will change the way that we probably provide our services today, tomorrow, and in the future, this is where analytics comes in. It takes all of that data being generated and provides knowledge and actionable intelligence on what do we need to go work on? How is our building performing? So what type of things to consider when implementing analytics? And this is where we're going to get into, and I think there's one. Yes, perfect. We're going to get into rules-based services versus managed services. And when we consider rules-based service from a deployment standpoint, it requires development of the analysis from scratch or a more do-it-yourself approach. So from a rules-based standpoint is normally an analytical provider will provide the software and the means to perform the analysis, but then it's up to an individual or a service provider or an end user to write that rule set and to develop that analysis and rule set for the sites that they're working on for that particular facility. From a managed services piece to where it's more of a library of pre-engineered algorithms that are going to perform automated fault detection and diagnostics. And really, one thing I've heard more and more on the managed services side of it, it's really building a digital twin of your automation system in the cloud to analyze all that data. So it's kind of a different way to think about it, is building that digital twin of within the cloud so that we're inputting all of these values that the automation system, all this data that's being generated by the automation system, we're porting over to the cloud. It's running against, well, how is my building supposed to be operating versus how is it operating, and providing analysis back. And I'm not going to go, as we said, we're going to distribute these slides. I'm not going to go through all the pros and cons, but really just want to highlight some things within here. From an informational output, rules engines are more conditional alarm-type logic that are customized by normally setting flags for set points being exceeded or a set amount of conditions being true, to where from a managed services piece, it's more diagnostic around identifying faults, but also we're identifying this fault because these are the parameters of the data that were not making sense or fell out of line of how the digital twin was operating, or how your sequences were, how it pretty much is comparing the building data that we're currently seeing today versus how was it designed and implemented, and bringing awareness to what faults were noticed and what is the diagnostic information around it by suggesting corrective actions around affecting cost, comfort, efficiency, so forth and so on. And then when we get down around to key attributes, from a rules, complete flexibility. Since the individual is up to the local site to write the rules and analysis, you have the complete flexibility to write the rules engines however you deem fit. To where a managed services, the key attributes is really around prioritization and impact. And this goes more towards identifying issues from the data sets being analyzed, prioritizing around KPIs that are important to the buildings we manage and maintain, and then what is the impact to the different kind of individuals from employee comfort, energy utilization, and then overall maintenance of the facility. So kind of just a kind of differentiator from the rules engines and managed services piece. So then we talk about what goes into adopting a condition-based maintenance model. So all right, so we have the analytics, we kind of understand the technology side of it, but what do we do with it, right? And it's really about combining people, technology, and collaboration. And we'll start in the middle around technology, and the technology side of it's going to be your analytics and your analytical engines. And then you have the people side of it. This is something we don't want to displace our current employee staff or our current staffing. We just want to provide them the means to make more informed business decisions, to make them more efficient in their jobs. So really with the people aspect of it, we still have people. We still have, whether it be remote system experts, certified on-site technicians, they need to still solve problems in parallel with technology. And then the last is collaboration. And the collaboration, it could be around customized report capabilities for insights into your building systems. But the really way I view collaboration is if we empower our people to leverage the technology that is available, they start to have a collaborative experience. They start to experience and perform their daily tasks in a different mindset. They're allowing the building to kind of to generate its faults and prioritize where do our people need to go for the best KPIs within our facilities and have the most impact within our facilities. And we start to collaborate a little bit differently. And the collaboration becomes more of an experience, right? It becomes the experience of how do our people experience their jobs on a daily basis by leveraging technology, and then it also, how do we provide this experience to our tenants, the employees of our tenants, our patients within healthcare facilities. You can even break it down to the experience of servers in a data center. How do servers operate differently in a more comfortable environment? And it's really around how do we empower our people to leverage the technology available to collaborate and perform a different experience in their daily duties. So we talk about visibility, and so now how do we increase team competency? And this really goes around prioritizing performance, expenses, and building improvements. And the first thing we want to talk to is about shifting operating expenses to areas where most savings can be, where they can occur. And it's really around having the availability through analytical engines to regularly review summary reports with expert recommendations, having the awareness and having the ability to take actions on highest avoidable cost issues. Where do we, and this goes back to, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, where do we want our maintenance team going today? Do we have the availability to kind of assign our work schedule today to go take care of a subset of issues because it has an avoidable cost aspect to it? When I talk about avoidable cost is what energy might be saved or what increase of employee productivity can happen if we go remedy this situation today rather than when it's time to do our quarterly or annually or monthly maintenance. And then it's also around addressing root cause, which also reduces reactive maintenance in the future. So it's really around where can we start to shift operational expenditures from to where we can save most. And the only way we can do this is having the data to make informed decisions. and this is the fundamental parameter around all of this is the more data we have and the more analysis that we can perform, we can start shifting where we want to spend our dollars, our time, and our investments to where they have the most impact in our facilities. Then we talked about maintenance based on analytical findings, and this is really changing the way we maintain facilities. How do we perform maintenance? And it really comes down to having the availability to understand where do we see diagnostics, where do we see faults within our facilities, and how do we start to manage and maintain them. And it's really around it's one thing to understand what a fault is or where a fault has occurred, but what are the impacts to our facility? Is it around energy? Is it around comfort of our employees? Is it around maintenance of our pieces of equipment? And it really starts to, how do we start changing the mindset of our individuals of utilizing building data that's generated every day? There's an interesting fact that 20% of the data generated by a building automation system gets utilized on a daily basis. So how do we utilize that other 80% that is already there, it's already being generated, it's inherent and resident to our systems? How do we get it, and how do we make more informed decisions, and how do we perform our maintenance on it? This goes back to something I said earlier. Just because it's a Tuesday and on Tuesday we change filters, or it's a Tuesday and we go look at VAV boxes, do we need to do that today, or do we need to prioritize our workload based upon impacts from faults that are being detected on the facility itself? So it's really starting to change the mindset of allowing the data to make our business intelligent and making decisions based off of that business intelligence. And how do we prioritize our workload? And it all correlates back to staffing, the experience, and having people act like 35-year experienced personnel in a similar staffing environment, but performing and having more higher efficiencies because we're utilizing the data that's readily available. And just presenting it in a mindset to change their workflow and how they experience their daily work environment. And then this is prioritized. I already spoke about it, but how do we prioritize work based on analytical findings and expert recommendations? And it's really, how do we start reviewing the diagnostics around problems and possible causes and opportunities and suggested actions? And this is where the maintenance side of it and reacting to the data is. Providing data is one thing, but having the availability and analytics to analyze it and make recommendations and bringing awareness to here are faults or problems within our environment, here are possible causes that are happening within the field. Now from an engineering standpoint, a mechanic standpoint, a service provider standpoint, wow, I did not know that was happening. I see the impact on my building and the KPIs within my building, and I already have a head start of what's probably happening in the field. So now either I'm bringing the correct part to make my fix, I'm at least going there with knowledge and awareness so that if I need to leverage a different person within my organization, I can leverage that person so I can bring this anomaly or fault back in line with how the building is supposed to be operating. So it provides efficiencies, it provides prioritizing of work, and it really provides what do we want to do today? How do we interact with data and make better decisions? How do we provide business intelligence to really differentiate our business decisions? And it's really bringing awareness on how is the data being generated, what is it telling us, what faults are being revealed, and what do we need to go fix out in the field to bring this back in line. So how do analytics and managed services being utilized? So it's throughout the life cycle of the building, and we start to look at the initial BMS installation. So how can we utilize all this technology from a greenfield job or a retrofit job? And how do we start to utilize and initialize from the BMS install? And it's around, we can utilize it to validate commissioning, ensure design implementation, turnover accurate systems. From post-BMS installation, we can utilize it to validate performing as designed for an extended period. So now we're proving that the design and specification is actually being performed after you've paid for the systems. Enterprise building portfolio, the availability to monitor multiple buildings or multiple sites and spend where improvements are needed the most, or allocate staffing and resources to sites where it's needed the most. Then we have monitoring-based commissioning, having the availability to monitor and constantly improve to sustain savings, and it's really moving away from retro commissioning and moving more into constant commission and monitoring-based commissioning, and utilizing the data to make more informed decisions on how do we recommission systems. And then show the value of your maintenance team's efforts. And it's really having the availability to provide more granularity into their roles and performing efficiencies on how they perform service within the environment. So we talk about efficient. So what can be seen within efficiencies through utilizing analytical technologies? And what can be seen and what has been seen within the industry is a decrease of 29% of unscheduled maintenance. So we think about break fix, having that availability to reduce the amount of times you have unscheduled maintenance to pieces of equipment. We're extending the life cycle of equipment. So there's an ROI component there, but we're also we're allowing our individuals to operate and dealing with what they need to deal with on a daily basis, where they don't have a ton of break fix issues to work on. Up to a 20% additional energy cost reduction, 33% fewer occupancy complaints, reducing the hot and cold calls, making people more comfortable in their environments, more comfortable in people, our employees are more productivity, or there's more productivity, which leads to an ROI component there. And then we think about 80% of the issues that are seen in a building automation system or a mechanical system can normally be resolved remotely. So we think back to the mobility side of it, having the ability to be mobile and analyze this data. We also have the availability to start acting remotely and resolving issues remotely. And the more we can do stuff utilizing technology, we're bringing systems back to functionality in a quicker fashion. The quicker we can bring something back into operational functionality, that has the availability to reduce occupancy complaints and has the availability to reduce energy costs. So another example result here. This is from a real life example, and what I wanted to show here was the amount of work order volume of shifting from a traditional, we'll wait till a work order is generated, or that kind of break fix or hot and cold complaints, and how do we start utilizing data differently? And what this chart is designed to show is when we start to transition, and it's kind of twofold here, as we start to transition to allowing data and analytics to dictate how we deliver our services, we start to see a bigger piece of the pie is being transitioned to analytically driven work orders or analytically driven services. But it also correlates to, we're also seeing a reduction in the amount of work orders that need to be issued. So we talk about efficiencies. We're starting to have the availability to get to problems before they are they are a work order, before people are uncomfortable and have a hot and cold complaint. We're starting to change the way we look at data and change the way we operate. So not only are we seeing more of the dollar spent from a maintenance being transitioned to analytically driven service, but also the number of service requests going down. So it's an interesting find here through an example of results is it is providing efficiencies. And this kind of ties all together with everything we spoke about earlier, from staffing to OPEX budgets to CAPEX to demographical changes to the amount of square footage in IoT systems. There's so much going on. How do we start kind of utilizing that data to act differently? And this kind of proves it out is we're increasing the amount of analytically driven service, but we're also decreasing the amount of service calls. We're allowing our teams to be more available, to work a little bit more efficiently, and things like that. So with that, that brings us to the end of the actual PowerPoint presentation and that part of the presentation. And we're going to transition over here to some questions and answers, and I will throw it back to Naomi to moderate.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrew. That was a fantastic presentation, chock full of really useful information. I just want to remind everybody that you can submit your questions using the question and answer panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So please send them in, and we'll get to as many as we can. So to begin with, one individual was asking if you could just kind of quickly recap what is the difference between the rules engines and managed services analytics, just kind of as a nutshell.
Yeah, in a nutshell, if we think about analytics, in a rules-based engine, someone will buy the analytical tool, so the software, from an analytical provider, and then it's up to either that local end user or facility team or service provider to actually write the rules themselves. So they have to program the system. So there's additional labor. They need to program all the alarm logic and all the logic into it. There are widgets and there's ways to work to make it a little easier to program it, but it is up to the particular end user to have that kind of technology written locally. To where a managed services piece is there's a library of predefined algorithms that have been added to case by case, and they kind of just attach these predefined algorithms into the building data to provide a result. So one is rules-based is really it's up to the end user or service provider to write the rules, to where the managed services, these rules already exist, and it's a more easily turnkey system for an end user to adopt.
Okay, perfect. One point that I wanted to follow up on, you mentioned towards the end of the presentation that 20% of data that the BAS is gathering is used on a daily basis, meaning that 80% is not being used. And you were talking about ways to kind of utilize more of that data. I was wondering why. Is it that the data is not that they're capturing data is being captured that is not necessarily needed to be captured, or is it just that there's not enough time in the day, or what is driving that 20% of utilization?
It's being driven by, and it's getting lower year by year, and the reason being it kind of correlates to everything we spoke about in the beginning. But the interesting thing that's happening, if we think about the HVAC building automation world, newer systems that are going in, newer IoT, we're talking to a lot more systems. So we're integrating to maybe the lighting control system, the fire control system, give you shade control systems. There's all these different systems that are being integrated into, and we're responding to more and more service calls just because there's more systems that are being put onto within our facilities. So it's something that I would say more of it's really time. There's not the availability. I mean, normally if I think about the building automation world, we're responding, if it's not a hot and cold complaint or somebody issuing a call to us, work orders are normally then generated by alarms that are generated by the automation system. And alarms don't really provide all the analysis that we can look for. If I think about simultaneously heating and cooling, we might have an alarm for a set point within that particular space, but unless somebody's looking at all of the data is there, but maybe only 20% of it's being utilized for alarming, we might miss simultaneously heating and cooling. We might not realize that an air handling is performing that functionality because set point's being made. But having analytics to look at the entire system and is all these parameters, is my valve open when it should be closed, even though I'm meeting set point? Yes, somebody can probably look at that other 80% of the data. There's just not enough time in the day. So how do we start leveraging technology to look at it on a 24-hour basis? It's really transferring, I don't want to say menial tasks, but hard, long tasks that take time, just transferring it to technology so that ourselves as individuals who service these facilities operate smarter, make more informed business decisions. The data's there, just we need to tap into it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. The questions are coming in fast and furious, so I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. So how much of a challenge is it working with the IT team to get the analytics engine set up and communicating to the cloud?
So this is actually one that I get probably asked more often than not, and it's something that the good part is what I have seen, and I hope I don't break any trade secrets or anything, is what has helped a lot of the IT adoption is actually Microsoft moving Office 365 to the cloud. IT departments have become more comfortable with cloud technology. The one thing I would say is the earlier in the process you can incorporate the IT department, the more that they're bought into this, the more that they're willing to put this on their network. And really, when I spoke about it earlier, When it's cloud-based, when it's a data push off-site, it's a more secure connection, it's data encrypted, and the data that's leaving sites is normally what's my point name, what's my point value. So it's really not highly classified user data. It's really just building automation data. But the cloud expertise, the cloud technology is becoming, it's more acceptable. 5 years ago, we would have had a different discussion around this. But I really feel that the earlier you can involve the IT department and have them understand that we're pushing data to a cloud environment and returning that information as business intelligence through a web portal. We're not necessarily rewriting information back to the automation system or controlling it. It's really around providing business intelligence through a web portal to make more informed business decisions.
Yeah, that early buy-in is always critical. Can the analytics do utility procurement forecasting?
Yes, there are some analytical engines that can help with the supply side. The vast majority of them that are going to be utilized within the industry are going to be more around HVAC analytics. There are platforms out there that have the availability to also start to look a little deeper on supply side, on the energy side of it, and kind of make some recommendations or consultative services, if you would, through an analytical engine.
Okay. Let's see. Same person was asking, can you discuss the twin of automation in cloud versus the supervisory for analytics?
Can you say that again?
Discuss the twin of automation in cloud versus the supervisory for analytics. I'm just reading that verbatim.
So I think I know where the question is going. So I spoke about it earlier from a managed services piece and from a cloud piece. And when I said digital twin, and if we think about at the very high level or the root of analytics, right, is we're taking data from the building automation system. This is data that's being generated 100% by the automation system, and we're analyzing it. And what we're analyzing that for is, what is the data telling us of how the building is operating versus how it's designed and intended, really based off sequence of operations. But it's how is the data, what is the data telling us of how the building's operating versus how it's designed and intended to operate? And that's where the digital twin is, what I spoke about before. By building a digital twin in the cloud, you're pretty much mimicking the automation system that's on site. And then the automation system on site is pushing that data into this digital twin, and we're analyzing it versus, this is the data that's being sent to us, is it actually being processed as the building's supposed to be operating, or is it not, and where are those faults being analyzed? So I think that's where the question was going, and if not, if we can gain a little bit more clarity, I'd be willing to answer that offline.
Okay. Perfect. Well, Andrew, I have one more question I want to ask you. So the whole presentation has been talking about utilizing analytics and how that kind of opens up this opportunity to shift from just purely utilities-based analytics to more the people impact and how you can make those people more productive. And I was just wondering, what is, when you're talking about utilities, it's easier to know what you're measuring and how you're kind of tracking that. When you're talking about people and productivity and efficiency, what are the metrics involved in that? Is it just temperature and comfort, or are there other things that analytics can kind of, take into the equation?
There's different things we can take into the equation. This becomes a little bit higher in math. I don't want to say higher in math, but it becomes a kind of a more of a theoretical conversation. And if we start to look at all of the industry reports that come out about healthy environments, the wellness, the new wellness standard and things like that, how a more comfortable or more tightly regulated environment from environmental standpoint can lead to less sick days. Less sick days leads to more productivity in the office, which leads to an ROI for companies. A temperature of 72 to 74 degrees leads to a 5% increase in worker productivity, and to ensure that we don't fall out of those parameters. There's different people aspects of it to where it becomes a little bit more soft in the ROI capabilities. Analytics and analytical platforms have the availability to start crunching some of that and have the availability to kind of produce those ROI results, or at least the impact around comfort and people comfort. They've traditionally been around energy and energy savings on the utility side of it. We're starting to see more and more around the people aspect of it, and it's more around the people aspect of it from a wellness indication and well standards and things like that.
Definitely. Well is definitely huge and only getting bigger. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to answer those questions. With that, I'm going to close up the Q&A. This has been a great webcast, and I also want to say a thanks to our sponsor. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.